Welcome to Unfair World. On this channel, I will show you the dark side of the world and the reality behind closed doors with theories that are very likely to be true. If you have a very ordinary life, you can join me on this journey by following me and liking the videos. Enjoy watching.
Israel and Iran are two powers that have shaped the fate of the Middle East for decades. On one side, a garrison state rising in the shadow of nuclear rumors. On the other, a theocracy founded by revolution and molded by tapes from Paris. When the barrels of these two entities, which had been engaged with each other for years through proxy forces, sabotage, assassinations, missiles, and threats, were turned directly against each other over the past few years, the world held its breath and asked whether the end of the world was nigh. However, when we reached 2026 and witnessed the liquidation of the Khamenei regime through Operation Roaring Lion, the real issue emerged. Was the Valley of the Revolutionary Spirit filled? Were Iran and Israel presented as ideological foes, truly enemies of each other, the region's two arch-rivals? Or are they secret friends who owe their existence to each other? Were those long-standing tensions and wars over the years a truly great showdown? Or was it a massive theater production staged under the spotlight, featuring a staged fight theme? Is the silence of China and Russia, who say that they are on the side of Iran in the face of all this, a surrender? Or is it the starting line of a new subcontracting task? There is no room for coincidence in this spider moment, where politics is woven with fine threads. Today, the masks are falling, the curtains are closing, and the real target emerges from the depths of that silent consensus. Today is the day to ask the real questions. Is this regime operation, brought down amidst the joyous cries of the people in Iran, just a tale of bringing so-called democracy to the Middle East? Or is it the last obstacle before the fulfillment of the Promised Land and the Greater Israel project? So is this the silent preparation for the great storm that will bear down on Turkey's doorstep? Where will the next fire fall? And more importantly, where will Turkey stand in this story? In the audience seat? On the target board? Or is it on the side that's spoiling the game? The 1979 Islamic Revolution was a turning point in relations between the two countries. Prior to this, Israel and the Iranian Shah's regime, as it was then known, had friendly relations, even if behind the scenes. From the 1950s until 1979, the Shah's government appeared to de facto recognize Israel. The intelligence services, Mossad and Savak, worked together. Iranian oil flowed to Israel. In fact, joint weapon development projects were being conducted. Among the Arab majority, Israel viewed only Iran as a natural ally. At that time, Iran was one of the most pro-American regimes in the Middle East. In fact, it was, so to speak, the United States' proxy in the region. This closeness also brought about the spark of the revolution. When the Islamic Revolution occurred in Iran under the leadership of Ayatollah Khomeini in 1979 and the Shah was overthrown, the situation changed radically. The newly established Islamic Republic ideologically adopted an anti-Western stance and was particularly hostile towards Israel. The so-called Khomeini regime included the idea that the Palestinian lands were occupied by Israel in its manifesto to the world. Therefore, it defined Israel as an illegitimate entity. It nicknamed Israel the Little United States and the United States the Great Evil. In Tehran, the Israeli embassy was closed and its building was given to the Palestine Liberation Organization. This radical breakaway strategically unsettled Israel. At that time, Iran was a regional power with massive oil reserves. Khomeini's Shiite ideology also began to find resonance in the Middle East. Israel suddenly found itself face to face with a new enemy that was threatening genocide against it. A familiar enemy who was once, and perhaps still is, a close friend, that is, Iran. Over the course of the 47 years that have passed, Iran has repeatedly threatened to erase Israel from the map. Articles calling for the elimination of Israel have been added to Iran's official policy. Tehran described Israel as a cancerous tumor that Western imperialism had introduced into the Middle East. These harsh moves created a perception of hatred towards Iran in Israel, and placed Iran at the top of the list of priority threats. But almost all of this was a formality, and no matter how much they tried to hide it, they entered into indirect cooperation during the same years. During the Iran-Iraq War, Israel secretly sold weapons to Iran because Saddam Hussein was viewed as a common enemy. This led to the relationship between Israel and Iran being described differently by conspiracy theorists, a false flag operation. At this very point, Israel and Iran are visible enemies. However, it became clear behind closed doors that they were each other's friends, and this friendship was never shaken. Both sides exploited the tension behind the scenes, staging hostility to consolidate their populations. The Iranian regime owed its existence to the rhetoric of hostility towards Israel. Similarly, Israel said, "Look, I have an enemy like Iran. That's why I'm arming myself." And this was true. Without Iran, Israel could not have armed itself to this extent. It could not present itself as a legitimate entity. The very entry of Khomeini, the leading figure of the revolution, into office actually contained many clues. Where was the Iranian regime established in 1979? In Paris. Where was the nighttime government formed? Again in Paris. Where did Khomeini come from? From Paris. So which flight did Khomeini take to Tehran? With Air France. What was the first sentence he said upon landing in Tehran? "We will erase Zionist Israel from the map. The West is the devil," he said. However, according to claims, the American ambassador was behind him while he was praying the prayer of gratitude. Additionally, during the same prayer service, a Jewish rabbi was present alongside the ambassador. Iran was key to Israel's security and survival. Israel, the world's only existing Jewish state, had a single goal in the region: to possess the promised land called the Land of Israel. You can even see the Land of Israel patches on the uniforms of some Israeli soldiers. Israel is within the ideal of the Greater Israel Project, which extends from the Nile River to the Euphrates River and includes Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Egypt. According to theorists, the Greater Israel Project is thought to have the same intent as the BOP, or Greater Middle East Project, which is known in Turkish public opinion and was developed by the United States. However, regardless of anything else, the aspect that concerns us is the following. Within the boundaries of the Dream of the Promised Land, or the Arzi Mavud, the southeastern territories of Turkey are also included. This is very important. Politics is like a spider's web, woven inch by inch. There is no such thing as coincidence, if you think it exists. Now let's return to Khomeini. After being deported in October 1978, Khomeini was settled by the forces behind him in the village of Nusul-i-Château near Paris. This village is not a place of exile. It was a waiting room operation that hosted one of the greatest strategic bargains in history. So, why Paris? Paris was the largest speaker system through which Khomeini could make his voice heard to the whole world. After Khomeini arrived here, this place was suddenly transformed into a media center. His modest house in the village was flooded with dozens of journalists from around the world every day. BBC, Le Monde, New York Times, Western media. This elderly cleric, who championed democracy and freedom against the Shah's oppressive regime, was presented to the world as a charismatic leader. While the world expected Khomeini's connection with the Iranian people to weaken while he was in Paris, Khomeini, on the contrary, strengthened this bond. The sermons and instructions he delivered in Paris were recorded on audio tapes. These tapes were smuggled into Iran in secret, duplicated there, and played to thousands of people in mosques and marketplaces. In other words, the center of the revolution was Paris. Its terminals were the tape recorders in Tehran. The Paris process was where Khomeini was portrayed not only as a religious figure but also as a political alternative. Western-educated figures who spoke foreign languages and were familiar with the modern world were brought to Paris to be with Khomeini. These figures translated Khomeini's messages using concepts such as human rights and anti-imperialism that the Western public could understand. The French president at the time tightened relations with Khomeini, anticipating the overthrow of the Shah. Khomeini's security was even provided by the French police. This situation became the main source of claims that it laid the groundwork for the arrival of Western-backed Khomeini. The most iconic example of this process was that historic flight on the 1st of February 1979. When Khomeini decided to return to Tehran for the victory of the revolution, a top-of-the-line Boeing 747 aircraft and his team were allocated for him and his entourage, 120 world-renowned journalists. The moment Khomeini landed in Tehran and the scene of a transless pilot taking her arm as she stepped off the plane were the final scenes of the Paris process. The political landscape underwent a radical transformation when the power balances were reorganized, and this process began only 2 years later. In 1981, Israel and Iran united at a single point against a common enemy. When Saddam Hussein, leading Iraq on the path to becoming a nuclear power, attacked Iran, the Iranian army was equipped with American-made weapons, and they needed spare parts. But did anyone understand these parts? The slogan referred to Israel as being erased from the map. The incident that went down in history as the Iran-Contra scandal was the most concrete documentation of this theater of operations in Israel. While Iran was bombing that Iraqi nuclear reactor, it provided logistical and intelligence support. It shared maps of the nuclear facilities. Why? Because a strong Iraq was an undesirable reality for both sides. As a result of this collaboration, Israel used Iran as a counterbalance against the Arab world, while Iran consolidated its revolution with the weapons it acquired. The flags burned in the squares were enough to cover up the dollars stashed away in safes. During the Shah's reign, Israel and Iran even established a joint pipeline along the Eliyahu-Ashkelon axis to transport Iranian oil to the Mediterranean. Despite not officially recognizing each other, or even being at odds, these two countries maintained a massive commercial traffic that operated through third parties. After Khomeini's death in 1989, Ali Khamenei took the seat. According to the Iranian constitution, the supreme leader was required to be a marja, that is, the highest-ranking religious authority. At that time, Khamenei was only a mid-level cleric. In order for Khamenei to assume the position, the constitution was amended through a referendum, and his rank was downgraded. After Khamenei came to power, Israeli-Iranian relations moved from the spotlight into the shadows, and proxies stepped in. Structures like Hezbollah and Hamas enabled Iran's expansion in the region under the banner of the resistance axis. This was a boon for Israel, because, as always during election periods, Israel brought the Iranian threat to the table as a fear factor. If there were no bogeyman like Iran, could Israel today be a garrison state with the world's most advanced military technologies? A mutually reinforcing ecosystem had been established. Iran was vying for leadership of the Islamic world by antagonizing Israel, while Israel was receiving unlimited support from the West due to the Iranian threat. With the Arab Spring, Syria became a training ground for these two powers. While Iran descended onto the battlefield to prop up the Assad regime, it gained the freedom to bomb Syria at will by claiming to be protecting Israeli security. The nuclear program issue was the longest-running act in this theater. For years, it was said that Iran was 3 months away from a nuclear bomb. But those 3 months never ended. That bomb never surfaced or exploded. However, this rhetoric was enough to further entrench the United States in the region and to push the Gulf countries fearfully into Israel's camp. The Greater Israel Project was running smoothly. Named after Prophet Abraham, who is considered the common ancestor of the 3 Abrahamic religions, the Abraham Accords led Muslim states such as the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan to achieve full normalization with Israel. Saudi Arabia, however, did not officially sign the accords due to the Mecca-Medina factor. But behind the scenes, he was the real patron of these agreements. Egypt and Oman were also directed as secret allies. On paper, this agreement was a diplomatic formality that turned the Arab-Israeli conflict into a common enemy against the Iranian axis. Iran began to better consolidate its domestic support by claiming to have been stabbed in the back by our Muslim brothers, and gradually grew stronger. In Israel, they continued to lay the stones one by one along the path to the Promised Land under the shadow of Iran's threats. And we have reached that critical turning point, that is, direct conflict. The shadow war that had been waged for years through proxy forces was brought back into the spotlight in 2024. So what has changed? Especially over the last 2 years, both states have been directly targeting each other's territory. The year 2024 marked a complete shift in strategic balances, with the sides engaging each other from their own territories in the most intense manner ever. In June 2025, a very intense 1-2-day direct war broke out between the two countries. During this period, America intervened and targeted Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Today, in 2026, this situation has evolved to a completely different level. Israel and the United States launched a massive operation against Iran, codenamed Roaring Lion and Epic Rage, which also aimed at regime change. Khamenei and his command staff were eliminated. Popular destinations like Dubai and Qatar rely on reputation to maintain their status. Bow, close this. It's an interesting equation. Almost every move is against America. But what's unusual is this. America has begun to fall out with Europe, its longtime ally. He also left alone the Gulf countries he visited and established new relations with a few months ago. These developments need to be viewed by considering the bigger picture. You know, Trump recently took over Maduro. Now, America is extracting Venezuela's oil and natural gas, which are significant resources there. When the Strait of Hormuz closes, America steps in to meet its oil needs. This too benefits Russia, its rival, as the oil price rises. That's another matter. By the way, speaking of Russia, there is deep silence prevailing in the Axis, the group consisting of China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia, which also includes Iran. However, regardless of what happens, when we look at the outcome, it seems that Israel is getting what it wants somehow. According to experts, Khamenei's death is not a loss. Don't be surprised by global actors reviving a stale instrument on their agenda, celebrations in the streets, and masses wrapping themselves in American flags. This is the most beloved scene in the drama of bringing democracy. It may seem like the regime is changing, but what has really changed is that Iran has evolved from being a threat to being a subcontractor. Now Hamadeh's name will be replaced. Whether he is a moderate technocrat or a reformist figure, not a single fact will change. The new Iran will no longer be an ideological barrier to the Greater Israel Project and the Promised Land ideal. It will become a highway, paving the way to those goals. Whether the regime changes or not, it makes no difference. The only thing that will change will be the mask. According to my reading of the situation, there will not be a third world war. Those at the table do not want a major apocalypse. They are after manageable chaos. This current rupture is about narrowing the target rather than the globalization of war. Now it's Turkey's turn to be on its guard. The barrels of the regulations will now be pointed not at ideological opponents, but directly at geographical barriers. The shadowy part of the collusive struggle is over. The real target is now in sight. So it's time for those promised lands. The grand plan is in motion. However, if you know this, you also know that every game maker has a game breaker. The problem with having too many enemies is that one day they all become friends. Today, these covert maneuvers are an inevitable reflection of the actions that brought Spain and Turkey together on the same axis, lifted the curtain on the Gulf, built bridges between London and Washington, and led to the decision to renew nuclear capabilities in Paris. We don't know which side will emerge victorious, but as elephants clash, it is the grass that gets trampled again. History has shown us this time and again. States act out of self-interest, not friendship. Yesterday's declared enemy sits at the table today. Today's so-called brother is sold out at the first opportunity tomorrow. In the Middle East, no slogan is as real as oil. No anger is as innocent as a map. That's why sometimes wars are fought not for territory but for minds. And the most dangerous plan is that silent consensus everyone thinks is a fight. In these geographies at the heart of the world where we live, nothing is as it seems. Even the hostilities here sometimes operate like lines from a well-written script. The biggest lies are sometimes hidden within the most sacred slogans. Therefore, the issue is no longer merely who Iran is, what Israel wants, or where America is targeting. The question is, by what wind was this fire fanned? By whose hands was it guided? And most importantly, on what soil will the next fire fall? As this final act draws to a close, amidst the applause for victory right under our noses, the question we must ask is this: will it be the same disaster scenario? Are we witnessing the delayed conclusion of the power struggle among these actors playing different roles? Or is it the great beginning from which that path leading to the real goal was silently paved? Is this Middle East equation unfolding in Iran the final farewell of an era? Or is it the first move of the great ambush that has just been set? Are these the final moves before the collapse of the reign of these superpowers? Or is it the final lock of the devious cage they want to trap the Middle East within? The gear they have shifted into,